My heart stopped for 17 seconds in the ICU. When I opened my eyes, the nurse asked if I wanted to call my family. He didn't know they were watching sunsets in Bali while I fought for my life. I discovered the truth from a note left beside my hospital bed. Gone for 2 weeks. Hope you're better when we get back. I waited. I healed in silence. Then I sold the house, drained the accounts, and disappeared. When they returned, I was already gone. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe. And please tell me and others what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late. Share it in the comments below. For 36 years, I built a life in Phoenix. I taught high school English for 28 of those years, inspiring generations of students while raising 2 daughters after my husband David died of pancreatic cancer. The desert became part of me, its resilience, its quiet strength, its ability to bloom despite everything. Our house on Saguaro Ridge wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. Every wall held a memory, the doorframe where I marked Diana and Jessica's heights each birthday, the kitchen island, where we rolled Christmas cookies, the back patio, where David proposed with string lights and nervous hands. I'd paid off the mortgage 5 years ago after decades of careful saving and summer school teaching. The deed bore my name alone, Margaret Reynolds' widow homeowner mother. I'd always considered myself fortunate. After David died, I kept our family intact through sheer force of will. I worked 2 jobs to put the girls through college. I never missed a dance recital or graduation. Diana became a marketing executive, Jessica, an architect. I was proud. I thought they were too. When Paul, Diana's husband, lost his consulting business during the recession, I remortgaged my house to help them. When they needed a down payment for their first home, I emptied my vacation fund. Family first, I always said. My daughters would smile and hug me, but something changed in their eyes over the years, a calculation, a distance I couldn't name. Last spring, I started feeling dizzy during my morning walks. The doctor found a heart condition treatable but serious. "You'll need to slow down," he said. I nodded, thinking I could finally enjoy retirement, maybe travel a little. Diana and Jessica exchanged glances when I told them the diagnosis. Now I understand what passed between them. "Mom, you should move closer to us," Diana said one evening over dinner. "Or we could help you downsize," Jessica added. "This house is too much for one person." I brushed them off. "I'm fine. The house is paid for, and I love my garden." They didn't bring it up again, but I caught them whispering on the patio, Paul's voice joining theirs. I thought they were concerned. I mistook calculation for care. 3 months after my diagnosis, while deadheading roses in the July heat, I collapsed. The neighbor found me and called an ambulance. I remember fragments: the siren, the oxygen mask, a doctor saying, "cardiac event," then darkness. When I woke in the ICU, everything was white and beeping. My chest felt like someone had cracked it open. A nurse named Miguel adjusted my IV and asked softly if there was anyone he should call. I asked for my daughters. His eyes shifted. He already had. "Just rest, Mrs. Reynolds," he said, checking my monitors. "You've been through a lot." That night after the shift change, I heard Miguel on the phone near my bed. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. "Yes, ma'am, she's stabilized." "Yes. No, she's conscious now. Would you like to speak with her?" A pause. "Okay, got it. I just thought you'd want to know." I lay there blinking under the fluorescent lights, trying to process that my own daughter had refused to take the call. The pain in my chest intensified, and it had nothing to do with my heart condition. I was in the ICU for 9 days. No visitors, no flowers, no calls. Nothing but the rhythmic beeping of machines and the gentle efficiency of nurses who pitied me. On the 7th day, Miguel brought me a note that had been dropped off at the front desk. The handwriting was Jessica's hasty and slanted, "Mom, had this trip planned for months. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Left spare key with Paul's sister. Hope you're better when we get back. J&D." I folded the note carefully and placed it under my water cup. In that moment, something crystallized inside me. Not anger, something colder, clearer. A realization that the world I thought I inhabited wasn't real. The daughters I thought I knew were strangers, wearing familiar faces. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply waited, gathering strength like a desert plant conserving water, preparing for what would come next. When I was finally discharged, Miguel was the only one who offered to wheel me out. The hospital transport van dropped me at my house, where I waited outside for 30 minutes because the spare key hidden in the ceramic cactus was gone. Someone had taken it. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Diana or Jessica. It was Paul, my son-in-law, holding a Starbucks and looking startled to see me.
"Maggie, we didn't expect you home so soon,"
he stammered, coffee sloshing as he stepped aside.
"We were going to visit tomorrow."
"Were you?" I asked, moving past him into my own home. Something was wrong. The furniture had been rearranged. The walls in the living room were half painted a sterile beige, erasing the warm terracotta I'd chosen with David. My wedding photos were boxed up in the corner like yard sale items. On the dining table lay a real estate flyer with my house featured prominently. "Desert Gem ideal for growing families or investors," the headline read. I hadn't agreed to any sale. I hadn't signed anything. "Paul," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands.
"What's going on here?"
He shuffled eyes, darting to his phone.
"Just some updates. Diana thought, well, we all thought the place could use some refreshing. Market values in this neighborhood are skyrocketing."
"Where are my things?" I asked, noticing empty spaces where family heirlooms had stood.
"Storage, just temporarily. Makes the place show better." "Show better to whom?"
He didn't answer, just checked his watch.
"Look, I've got to run. Meeting with a client. Diana will explain everything tomorrow."
After he left, I stood in my altered living room trying to reconcile the home I remembered with this staged shell. That's when I saw the file folder on the kitchen counter, partially hidden under a stack of mail. Power of attorney paperwork. My signature was there, dated 18 months ago, from when I had a minor procedure for cataracts. They'd told me it was just a precaution. Apparently, they'd used it while I was unconscious to start clearing me out. I sat down on the floor because my legs wouldn't hold me. The house spun around me, not from my condition, but from the realization that my own children had begun erasing me while I lay fighting for my life. Eventually, I reached for Jessica's iPad that was plugged in near the pantry. It still worked, and she'd forgotten to log out of her messages. That's how I saw it, Diana. "House goes on, MLS Monday, got the staging company coming Friday." "Jessica, if she's not home yet, we'll start the assisted living intake at Sunrise Valley." Diana. "Let's be honest, Mom was never good at boundaries." "Jessica, Paul says her heart thing means she can't live alone anymore. Doctor's orders." "Diana, we're doing her a favor. She'd never downsize on her own." There was more talk of furniture division, what to keep, what to sell. Plans for my transition, as they called it. Not one message asking how I was doing in the hospital. Not one. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood up, opened the pantry, and pulled out the shoebox where I kept my emergency cash. Then I took out the handwritten ledger I'd used to track passwords since 2001. Because if they thought I was dead weight, if they thought I was going to sit there and let them pack me into a nursing home while they sold my life piece by piece, they forgot who raised them. The next morning, I waited until Paul left for whatever fake errand he had lined up. Then I walked straight into the guest bedroom, which they had turned into some kind of staging area. Half of my clothes were folded on the bed, some in plastic donation bags, and my dresser drawers were empty. They hadn't even bothered to ask what I wanted to keep. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some misunderstanding. They weren't preparing to help me recover. They were preparing to remove me. I took the iPad again and found more messages. Paul had texted Diana from the airport,
Once Mom's house sells, we'll finally have room to breathe financially. That college fund for Connor is looking much better. Room to breathe. From what? From the woman who raised them through 2 jobs after their father died. From the person who took on their debt when Paul's business collapsed and who watched their children every summer for free while they jetted off to Cabo in Europe. I went back to the kitchen and looked more closely at the power of attorney document. It wasn't the limited one I'd signed before my cataract surgery. It was a broader one notarized during my brief hospital stay for pneumonia last winter, when Diana had rushed me to sign while I was feverish, saying it was just for insurance purposes. I remember scribbling my name and thinking it didn't matter. Now it was being used to dismantle my life. With shaking hands, I called Thomas Bennett, a former student who was now an attorney with his own practice. He'd helped me with my will after David died. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said warmly. "It's been too long. How are you?" "Not well, Thomas," I replied and told him everything. He listened in silence and then said, "You're not the first, Maggie, but we can fight this. That power of attorney is problematic for several reasons. Can you come to my office tomorrow?" The next day, Thomas reviewed the documents and confirmed what I'd hoped: the power of attorney didn't extend to real estate transfers without explicit consent. More importantly, there were inconsistencies in the document itself. "Look at the date," he said, pointing to the notarization. "You were in the hospital that day according to your records, but this notary works in Tempe, not Phoenix. How did you get to Tempe while hospitalized?" "I didn't," I said quietly. His eyes met mine. "Then someone else signed this. Not you." He pulled out a magnifying glass and examined the signature more closely. "The pressure points are wrong. This is a forgery, Maggie." I felt the floor shift under me again, but this time, it wasn't despair. It was fury, cold and clarifying. "What can we do?" I asked. "Plenty," Thomas said, reaching for his legal pad. "They're jumping the gun. If you move fast, you can flip this on them. But first, we need to document everything. And I mean everything." That night, after Thomas left with copies of all the documents, I stood in the doorway of the living room where we used to celebrate birthdays, looked at the faint rectangle on the wall where David's favorite painting had hung, and told myself this would be the last time I ever looked back. I wasn't just leaving the house. I was leaving the idea that they were still my family. They weren't. They were strangers in familiar skins. And the most dangerous part? They thought I didn't have the strength to walk away first. I didn't waste time confronting them. There was no point screaming into ears that had already tuned me out, and I wasn't going to sit around waiting to be boxed up like an old lamp they didn't want anymore. I had already begun to disappear. Not out of weakness, but out of strategy. Silent reclamation begins with absolute clarity. I knew exactly who they were now. And they had no idea who I was about to become. Thomas moved quickly. Within 3 days, we had the power of attorney revoked on grounds of suspected forgery and a cease and desist letter sent to the real estate agent they'd enlisted. I changed the locks first, then told Paul through the doorbell camera to come get his tools before I donated them. He didn't even argue, just grabbed them in silence and left the gate open like the coward he is. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Thomas. I told him only that I needed to secure my assets and would be in touch. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and said, "Be careful, Maggie, and call me if you need anything." The next week passed in a blur of calculated dismantling. I sold everything except the photos I cared about David's watch and a box of childhood drawings the girls had made when they still remembered how to love. I contracted with an estate sale company that specialized in quick liquidations, telling them I was moving to assisted living and needed everything gone. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house sold in 9 days, cash buyer, no contingencies, well above asking price. The real estate market in Phoenix was booming, and my desert gem was particularly desirable.
I walked into the bank and closed every account my daughters had access to, then opened a new one in a different branch, under a variation of my name, Catherine Winters, my grandmother's maiden name. I cashed out some funds as money orders and kept them in a locked travel pouch. My car was the last thing I kept, a modest gray Honda that nobody would look twice at. Anonymity was my new armor. The night before I left, I sat in my empty living room on a folding chair I'd bought from Target, ate a sandwich off a paper plate, and wrote 2 letters, one to each daughter. I didn't fill them with blame or recriminations. I simply wrote, "You've shown me who you really are. Thank you for the education. The house proceeds have been donated to a charitable trust for students who, like your father, come from nothing and build something through sheer determination. The lawyer has the details. Don't look for me. I won't be found." I lied about the donation. The money was safely mine, but I knew the thought of their inheritance going to strangers would hurt more than any insult I could write. I left the letters on the kitchen counter, unplugged the refrigerator, and took the spare key out of the ceramic cactus in the yard. I was out of Phoenix by sunrise, heading northwest on I-17 with no GPS, no destination, and no one looking out for me but me. I wasn't running. I was removing myself. There's a difference. They wanted a life without me. Now they would get it. By the time I crossed into Nevada, I'd burned through half a tank of gas, 2 black coffees, and whatever grief I had left for Phoenix. And by the time I pulled into the small town of Cascade Falls, Oregon, population 736, I felt something close to peace for the first time in months. I chose it randomly off a highway sign that advertised Cascade Falls Library, where books and community meet. That was enough for me. I checked into a worn motel that accepted cash paid for a week up front and introduced myself as Catherine Winters, retired teacher from Tucson, widowed, childless, and newly looking for a fresh start. The woman at the desk barely looked up from her crossword. "Running from something, hon?" she asked casually. "Starting something," I corrected. She nodded. "Same thing usually?" That's the version of me I told everyone. And the scary part was how easy it was to slip into it, how no one questioned anything. Because in a place that small people assume you're reinventing yourself, and they respect you more for it. I found a small cottage for rent on the edge of town, overlooking the falls. Fully furnished, $675 a month, no lease required if I paid in cash. The man who showed it to me, Bill, asked no questions other than, "You smoke?" Which I didn't, and that was that. I bought groceries from the local market, signed up for a library card under my new name, and started volunteering there 3 days a week, shelving books and helping with the children's reading program. Within 2 weeks, I was a familiar face, the quiet woman with the slight southwestern accent and steady hands who always remembered to ask about your garden or your mother's hip surgery. That's where I met Rachel, a 30-something single mother with tired eyes and a quick smile, and her daughter Sophie, who took to me immediately. Sophie started calling me Miss Cat after the 3rd week, and I didn't correct her. I helped Rachel with childcare, sometimes told her I used to be a teacher, and helped Sophie with her reading. And slowly, the days got easier. I kept a small notebook under my pillow where I wrote down every lie I told, just in case I needed to remember who I was supposed to be. No children, no Phoenix, no Diana, no Jessica, just Catherine and her quiet cottage by the falls. But at night, when I was alone, I'd sometimes wake up gasping. Not because I was scared, but because I was terrified someone would knock on the door and say my real name out loud. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was hiding. And even though no one had come looking yet, I knew eventually someone would. The medication I took for my heart condition reminded me daily of what had happened. Each little blue pill was a memento of betrayal. Sometimes I'd hold one in my palm and wonder if my daughters ever thought about me taking them alone without their help or supervision. Had they really convinced themselves I was incapable? Or was that just the convenient fiction they needed? During those first months in Cascade Falls, I lived like a ghost present, but not fully formed. I spoke when spoken to. I smiled when appropriate. I built routines that anchored me to this new reality, morning walks by the falls, afternoons at the library, evenings with books on my small porch. But inside, I was still falling, still processing the realization that the life I'd built had been an illusion. One evening, about 3 months after arriving, I was sitting on a bench by the falls when Rachel found me. She sat down without asking and handed me a coffee. "You okay, Kat?" she asked, looking straight ahead at the water. "Of course," I said automatically. "No, you're not," she replied. "None of us are. That's why we're here." I turned to her, startled by her directness. "We all came to Cascade Falls for a reason," she continued. "Running from something or toward something. Sometimes both." I didn't respond. "I left my ex in Seattle after he drained our bank account and disappeared for the 3rd time," she said matter-of-factly. "Sophie was 4. I changed our names and came here. So whatever you're running from, I get it." "I'm not running," I said quietly. "I'm rebuilding." She nodded. "Even better." We sat in silence for a while, watching the water crash down over ancient rocks, transforming itself with each descent. "Sophie loves you," she said finally. She never knew her grandmothers. "I'm not looking to be anyone's grandmother," I said more sharply than I intended. Rachel just smiled. "None of us are looking to be what we become. It just happens." She left me there with my cooling coffee and thoughts that refused to settle. That night, I dreamed of Diana and Jessica as little girls calling for me from across a widening river. I woke up crying for the first time since Phoenix. The free fall was ending. I was beginning to land one way or another. Back in Phoenix, the moment my daughters stepped off the plane and pulled into the driveway expecting to walk into their transition plan, everything unraveled at once. Diana called me first, and when it went to voicemail, she sent a text. "Mom, we're back. Can we come by tomorrow to discuss next steps?" I didn't answer, obviously, according to Thomas, who kept me informed through secure emails to an account I'd created specifically for this purpose. The panic set in when they realized the locks had been changed, the for sale sign was gone, and the mailbox was filled with final notices and bank closure confirmations. Jessica tried calling Thomas, who very politely told her he was no longer authorized to speak with them regarding my affairs. When she showed up at his office, he wouldn't even buzz her in. Paul went around to the back window of my house and tried to peer inside, but the place was empty. No furniture, no photos, not even a nail left in the wall. That same night, they filed a missing persons report. The detective assigned to the case wasn't particularly urgent about it, especially after Paul mentioned almost as an afterthought that they'd been in Bali while I was in the ICU, and when pressed admitted they hadn't visited me once during my 9-day hospital stay. "Let me get this straight," the detective reportedly said. "Your mother had a heart attack, was in intensive care for over a week, and you decided that was a good time for an international vacation." "We had it planned for months," Diana protested. "The doctor said she was stable. And now she's missing, and you're concerned about what exactly?" the detective asked, making notes. "Her well-being or the house she apparently sold." Within days, the story leaked. First through my neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, who had always disliked Diana's condescending attitude, and then through a local community Facebook group where someone posted, "Anyone know what happened to Margaret Reynolds? Her family listed her house while she was in the hospital." The comments exploded. Someone shared the real estate listing with the date it was posted and compared it to my hospital records, which another user somehow accessed through public data. This woman was fighting for her life, and her family was on vacation planning to sell her house. Disgusting. The outrage wasn't just digital. It turned real. A local news reporter showed up at Diana's house, then a larger Phoenix station picked it up as a human interest story, And suddenly, my daughter was being confronted in the Whole Foods parking lot by strangers calling her elder abuser, and worse. Jessica tried to salvage their reputation with a tearful interview. "We thought she was fine. We never expected her to leave. We're worried sick about her." But viewers weren't buying it. The segment was reposted on TikTok with remixed audio of Jessica saying, "We thought she was fine," juxtaposed with footage of luxury resorts in Bali. The caption read, "When your mom's inconvenient heart attack interrupts your vacation plans, had elderabus, #toxic family." People were tagging national talk shows calling for investigations, digging through Paul's business history, and speculating that maybe I hadn't disappeared at all. Maybe I'd finally outplayed them. And through it all, I remained silent, watching from my cottage in Oregon as my former life imploded. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. I felt invisible. And for the first time in decades, I didn't owe anyone a damn thing. But the internet has a long memory and an even longer reach. About 4 months after my disappearance, Rachel's sister came to visit from Portland. A former social media manager with an eagle eye for faces, she was scrolling through her phone during dinner at Rachel's when she suddenly looked up at me. "You look so familiar," she said, studying me. "Have we met before?" "I don't think so," I replied casually, passing the salad. "I've never been to Portland." She kept looking at me, then back at her phone. "No, it's something else. Were you ever a teacher?" "A long time ago," I admitted. "In Tucson." She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and the conversation moved on. But later that night, as I was helping clean up, she pulled me aside. "I know who you are," she whispered. "You're Margaret Reynolds from Phoenix, the one whose family tried to sell her house." My blood went cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "It's okay," she said quickly. "I'm not going to say anything. That story made me sick when I saw it. Those daughters of yours deserve everything they're getting." I stared at her, trapped between denial and relief at being seen. "How did you figure it out?" I finally asked. "I worked in crisis management PR. That story was used as a case study in one of our industry groups, how not to handle family crisis. I have a good memory for faces." She paused. "Your secret's safe with me, and with Rachel if you decide to tell her." After she left, I sat on my porch for hours, watching the falls in the distance, illuminated by the full moon. My carefully constructed identity felt suddenly fragile, like tissue paper in rain. If one person could recognize me, others could too. The next day, I met with Rachel at the coffee shop downtown. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. "My name is Margaret Reynolds," I said quietly. "I left Phoenix after my daughters tried to sell my house and place me in a care facility while I was recovering from a heart attack." Rachel didn't seem surprised. "I figured it was something like that. The way you flinch when family comes up, how you never talk about your past." "Are you going to ask me to leave?" I asked, bracing myself. She looked genuinely confused. "Why would I do that? This is exactly why Cascade Falls exists, for people starting over." I felt tears threatening. "I've been lying to everyone." "You've been protecting yourself," she corrected. "There's a difference." That night, I pulled out my notebook and reread all the lies I'd recorded. Then I wrote a new entry. "Rachel knows. I'm still here." It felt like the first truthful thing I'd written in months. The next morning, I called Thomas from a secure line. I needed to know what was happening in Phoenix, whether the search for me had intensified or died down. What he told me changed everything. "They found something, Maggie," he said, his voice serious. "The police investigation into your disappearance uncovered evidence of financial fraud. Not just the forged power of attorney, but systematic theft from your accounts over the past 3 years." "What are you talking about?" I asked, stunned. "Small transfers, usually under $1,000 from your savings to a joint account in Diana and Paul's names. Over 30 of them. and a second mortgage taken out on your house last year with a forged signature. The money, nearly $120,000, was transferred to an investment account in Paul's name. I sat down hard, my mind racing. I never authorized any of that. I know. That's why the fraud division is now involved. They've seized financial records from both your daughters. It appears Paul was orchestrating most of it, but Diana and Jessica were aware. There are text messages. What kind of text messages? I asked, dreading the answer. Jessica to Diana, March of last year. Does Mom ever actually check her accounts? Paul says she never notices the transfers. I closed my eyes, feeling the betrayal cut even deeper than before. There's more, Thomas continued. They found draft emails discussing how to transition you to assisted living to gain control of your assets. They were planning this for over a year, Maggie. The heart attack just accelerated their timeline. When I hung up, I sat motionless for a long time, watching the falls through my window, thinking about how water always finds the path of least resistance. My daughters had seen me the same way, the path of least resistance to financial security. I was just a resource to be tapped, a problem to be managed. That night, I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do since leaving Phoenix. I searched my own name online. The results were overwhelming. News articles, opinion pieces, social media discussions all about the Phoenix grandmother who disappeared after her family's betrayal. There were even theories about where I might have gone, what might have happened to me. I clicked on a recent news update and saw Diana outside the courthouse looking thin and harried, ignoring reporters' questions as Paul was led out in handcuffs. The headline read, "Son-in-law charged with multiple counts of fraud in Phoenix grandmother case." I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow watching the family I'd once loved disintegrate on a computer screen. The discovery wasn't just about the fraud they'd committed. It was about the recognition that the betrayal went deeper, stretched back further than I'd ever imagined. They hadn't just abandoned me in the hospital. They'd been slowly erasing me for years. After learning about the fraud investigation, I faced a decision remain. Catherine Winters hidden in Cascade Falls, or reclaim Margaret Reynolds and confront what had happened. I spent days wrestling with it, walking for hours along the river, trying to find clarity. On the third day, I called Thomas. "I need to come back," I said without preamble. "Are you sure?" he asked. "The media attention has only intensified with the fraud charges. Your privacy." "My privacy is already compromised," I interrupted, "and I'm tired of hiding." Thomas was silent for a moment. "What are you planning to do?" "Finish what they started," I said, "but on my terms." 2 days later, I told Rachel everything, the full story, not just the outline. We sat on my porch until midnight, the sound of the falls a constant backdrop to my confession. When I finished, she took my hands in hers. "Whatever you decide to do, Sophie and I are here," she said. "You have a home in Cascade Falls no matter what." The next morning, I left my cottage key with Rachel and drove my Honda back toward Phoenix. I didn't take the direct route. I meandered, taking 3 days instead of 1, staying in small motels along the way, preparing myself for what would come next. I didn't call ahead. I didn't warn anyone. On a Tuesday morning, I simply walked into Thomas's office and said, "I'm ready." His secretary gasped audibly when she recognized me. Thomas emerged from his office, eyes wide with surprise despite our phone conversations. "Maggie," he said, embracing me. "You look different." "I am different," I replied. We spent the day reviewing the case against Paul and, by extension, my daughters. The evidence was damning: forged signatures, unauthorized transfers, manipulated power of attorney documents. The prosecutor was pushing for maximum penalties. "What do you want to do?" Thomas asked as evening approached. "I want to testify," I said, "but first I want to see them." "Are you sure that's wise?" "No. I admitted. But it's necessary. The next day, Thomas arranged a meeting at his office. Diana and Jessica arrived separately, both looking haggard and defensive. They didn't know I would be there. When I walked into the conference room, Jessica gasped, and Diana dropped her water bottle, spilling it across the table. "Mom," Jessica whispered, like she was seeing a ghost. I sat down across from them, my back straight, my gaze steady. I didn't smile. I didn't reach for them. I simply existed in the space, solid and undeniable. "Hello, girls," I said, my voice calm. "It's been a while." Diana recovered first. "Where have you been? Do you have any idea what you've put us through? The media? The police investigations?" "Diana," Thomas interrupted sharply. "This is not an accusation session. Your mother is here to discuss the fraud charges and what happens next." "Fraud charges?" Jessica's voice rose. "That's all, Paul. We didn't know." "Stop," I said quietly, and surprisingly, they both did. "I've seen the text messages. I know everything." The room went still. Outside, Phoenix traffic continued its endless hum, but inside time seemed suspended. "Why?" I finally asked. "I gave you everything. I never asked for anything in return. Why wasn't it enough?" Diana looked away. Jessica stared at her hands. Neither answered. "The property value," Thomas supplied when the silence stretched too long. "Your house is worth over $750,000 now. The neighborhood gentrified. They wanted to cash in before you—" He stopped himself. "Before I what?" I prompted. "Before I got too sick, before I needed care, or before I figured out what you were doing." "We were trying to help," Jessica whispered, tears forming. "You were getting older, your heart condition." "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't pretend this was about my welfare. You were in Bali when I nearly died. You didn't visit me once in the hospital. You told my doctor I was already in assisted living, so he would release me to home care." Diana's head snapped up. "How did you know that—" "The hospital social worker called me last week," Thomas interjected. "Part of the investigation." "What do you want from us?" Diana asked, her voice hard. "Money. The house is sold. There's nothing left." I studied my eldest daughter, trying to reconcile this bitter woman with the child who once made me handprint Mother's Day cards. "I don't want anything from you," I said finally. "I'm here to tell you I'm testifying against Paul, and against both of you if necessary." Jessica began to cry in earnest now. "Mom, please. We made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we're still your daughters." "No," I said, standing up. "You stopped being my daughters the moment you decided I was worth more to you gone than present. Blood doesn't make family. Actions do." As I turned to leave, Diana called out, "Where will you go? Back to wherever you've been hiding." I looked back at her, seeing clearly the fear behind her anger. Not fear of punishment, but fear of abandonment, the very thing they had done to me. "I'm not hiding anymore," I said. "I'm rebuilding. There's a difference." The news of my return spread like wildfire. By nightfall, reporters were camped outside Thomas's office building. By morning, national outlets were calling. The Phoenix grandmother had returned to testify against her family. I stayed in a hotel under a different name, protected by private security Thomas arranged. The district attorney met with me personally, eager to have my testimony strengthen their case against Paul, who is now facing up to 15 years for multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and elder financial abuse. "And my daughters?" I asked. The DA hesitated. "We're still determining their level of involvement. Diana faces potential charges as a co-conspirator. Jessica might qualify for a plea deal if she testifies against them." I nodded, feeling nothing but a dull ache where rage had once burned. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. I spent the intervening days preparing with Thomas and his team, reviewing documents, practicing my testimony. I also did something unexpected. I visited my old neighborhood. The new owners of my house were startled when I knocked on their door and introduced myself. They'd bought the house without knowing its history, the young woman explained apologetically. When I assured her I wasn't there to cause trouble, just to see it one last time, she hesitantly invited me in. Everything was different. New paint, new furniture, new energy. Nothing of me remained except the height marks on the kitchen doorframe they hadn't yet painted over. I traced Diana's 12-year-old measurement with my finger, thanked the confused couple, and left. That visit gave me the final clarity I needed. The house wasn't mine anymore. Those memories weren't my anchors. I was free to build something new because there was nothing left to hold on to. The day of the hearing arrived with a media circus outside the courthouse. I entered through a side door, flanked by Thomas and a victim advocate assigned by the DA's office. In the courtroom, Paul sat with his attorney, looking diminished in his orange jumpsuit. Diana and Jessica sat in the gallery, separated by a court order from discussing the case with each other. When I took the stand, the room went silent. I felt dozens of eyes on me, but I focused only on the prosecutor and spoke my truth clearly, without emotion or embellishment. I detailed finding the forged documents, discovering the unauthorized transfers, learning about the second mortgage I never signed for. "And did you authorize your son-in-law or daughters to make these financial decisions for you?" the prosecutor asked. "No," I replied. I was fully capable of managing my own affairs. My heart condition was treatable and under control. I lived independently, drove myself, and had no cognitive impairments of any kind. When Paul's attorney cross-examined me, trying to suggest I'd forgotten giving permission or had misunderstood family discussions about my care, I remained steady. "Sir," I said after a particularly pointed question about my memory, "I taught high school English for 28 years. I graded over 15,000 essays, memorized hundreds of poems, and could tell you which of my students had actually read the assignment and which had used Cliff's notes. My memory is not the problem here." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the courtroom. The judge suppressed a smile. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I allowed myself one look at my daughters. Jessica was crying silently. Diana stared straight ahead, her jaw set in defiance. Neither would meet my eyes. Outside the courthouse, against Thomas's advice, I agreed to make a brief statement to the press. Cameras flashed as I approached the microphones. "My name is Margaret Reynolds," I began. 8 months ago, while I was in intensive care recovering from a cardiac event, my family attempted to sell my home and place me in a facility without my knowledge or consent. When I discovered their plans, I chose to leave Phoenix and start a new life elsewhere. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I'm not here for vengeance. I'm here for accountability. Elder abuse is real, it is devastating, and it often comes from those we trust most. If my story helps even one person recognize the warning signs or gives someone the courage to protect themselves, then some good will have come from this pain. A reporter called out, "Will you ever forgive your daughters?" I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not others. I've forgiven myself for not seeing the truth sooner. The rest remains to be seen. With that, I stepped away from the microphones and returned to the courthouse with Thomas. We watched from a private room as the judge denied bail for Paul and set a trial date. Diana was released on her own recognizance but ordered to surrender her passport. Jessica, who had agreed to cooperate with prosecutors, left with her attorney to finalize her plea agreement. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I received a text from Rachel. "Sophie made you this. We're waiting when you're ready to come home." Attached was a picture of a childish drawing a cottage by a waterfall with 3 stick figures holding hands. Kat, Rachel, Sophie was written beneath them in wobbly letters. I traced the figures with my finger, and for the first time since this all began, allowed myself to cry, not from grief or anger, but from the recognition that home isn't where you're from. It's where you're understood. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Paul was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years. Diana received 3 years probation and community service after a plea agreement. Jessica, in exchange for her testimony, avoided criminal charges, but was required to complete financial counseling and 200 hours of community service at a senior center. I attended each day of the proceedings, sitting silently in the back of the courtroom, neither hiding nor drawing attention to myself. On the final day after the sentencing, Jessica approached me in the hallway. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling. I held up a hand. "Not here, Jessica." "Then where? When?" she pleaded. "You won't answer our calls or emails." "Because I have nothing to say yet," I replied honestly. "I need time." "Will you ever talk to us again?" she asked, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. "I don't know," I said. "That's the truth." 2 days later, I drove back to Cascade Falls. The media eventually lost interest as newer scandals emerged. The Phoenix grandmother became yesterday's news, and I was grateful for the fading spotlight. Rachel and Sophie met me at my cottage with a homemade welcome home sign and fresh flowers. The place had been cleaned and aired out, waiting for my return. "You came back," Sophie said, hugging my legs. "I told you I would," I replied, lifting her up despite my doctor's warnings about exertion. Some risks are worth taking. That first night back, Rachel brought dinner and we sat on my porch watching the falls in the distance. After Sophie went to sleep on the couch, Rachel asked the question I'd been expecting. "What happens now?" I sipped my tea, considering. "I live my life. Here, as Catherine Winters to most people. As Maggie to you and a few others who know the truth." "And your daughters?" I set down my cup. "They know where I am now. I've told them I need space and time. Whether we ever rebuild a relationship depends on them understanding what they did and why it was wrong. Not just legally wrong, but morally." "Do you think that's possible?" she asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm not closing the door completely. That would make me like them." 6 months passed. I settled back into my Cascade Falls routine, but with one significant change. I no longer hid who I was. To new acquaintances, I remained Catherine, but I gradually shared my story with friends who had earned my trust. The library director offered me a part-time paid position managing the children's reading program. I accepted, finding unexpected joy in working with young readers, watching their faces light up as stories transported them to other worlds. I started a book club for seniors that quickly became the social highlight of many members' weeks. My health improved under the care of a local cardiologist who, after learning my history, became fiercely protective of my medical autonomy. "No one makes decisions for you except you," she assured me during each visit. "I'll make sure of it." Rachel and Sophie became my chosen family. We celebrated holidays together, took weekend trips to the coast, established traditions that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with genuine affection. Sophie continued to call me Miss Cat. But now she knew my full story in age-appropriate terms. You had to find a new home because your first family wasn't kind to you. Like adoption, but backward, she'd concluded with the simple logic of a 7-year-old. On the anniversary of my heart attack, I received 2 letters forwarded through Thomas, one from each daughter. Diana's was brief, formal, almost businesslike. She was in therapy. She was sorry. She hoped someday I could forgive her. Jessica's was longer, tear-stained, in places filled with memories of good times and anguished apologies. I read them both, then placed them in the box where I kept the notebook of lies that had become a journal of truth. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took a week to sit with their words to examine my own feelings without rushing to reaction. Finally, I wrote back one letter addressed to both of them. I received your letters. Thank you for reaching out. I cannot yet offer what you're seeking, but I can offer honesty. I am building a new life in a place where I am valued for who I am, not what I own. I am surrounded by people who see me clearly and choose me daily. This is what family should be. If you want to be part of my life going forward, it must be on these terms: complete transparency, absolute respect for my autonomy, and the understanding that trust once broken is rebuilt slowly or not at all. I am not the same woman who left Phoenix. I will never again be the mother who sacrifices herself for others' comfort. I do not hate you. Hatred requires energy I am no longer willing to spend on the past. But love without boundaries is not love at all. It's surrender. I surrendered for too many years. If you wish to begin the long process of reconciliation, it starts with accepting who I am now, not who you wish I still was. I am sending this to both of you because secrets and separate conversations were part of what led us here. Transparency breaks that pattern. I am well. I am at peace. I hope someday you can say the same. I signed it Margaret rather than Mom. It was the most honest thing I could offer. 2 months later, Jessica came to Cascade Falls. She called first, asked permission, and respected my boundaries by staying at the local inn rather than assuming she could stay with me. We met at a neutral location, the coffee shop downtown, and talked for hours. Not about reconciliation, not about forgiveness, but about truth. She asked questions, and for perhaps the first time in her adult life, actually listened to my answers. You seem different here, she said as our meeting drew to a close. Stronger. I am different, I replied. Disappearing taught me how to be visible on my own terms. She nodded, understanding perhaps more than I expected. Can I come back sometime? Yes, I said, but slowly. This isn't a quick fix, Jessica. I know, she said. Nothing real is quick. Diana hasn't visited yet. Maybe she never will. I've made peace with that possibility. The daughter I raised and the woman she became may be too different to reconcile, but the door remains unlocked, if not wide open. Last week, Rachel and I sat by the falls watching Sophie play with other children from town. The spring sunshine warmed the rocks, and the water thundered with the promise of renewal. You know what I realized? I said, breaking our comfortable silence. They thought they were erasing me, but they actually helped me find myself. Rachel smiled. Phoenix rising and all that? I laughed. Something like that, though I prefer Cascade Falls flowing as my metaphor now. You could write a book, she suggested, not for the first time. Your story might help others. I considered it, watching the water transform itself with each descent, never the same river twice. Maybe someday, I said, when I'm ready to be fully seen. For now, I live between worlds, Margaret and Catherine hidden and revealed, wounded and healed. I take my heart medication each morning and feel gratitude rather than resentment for the second chance it represents. I answer to both names depending on who's calling. I've stopped keeping track of lies because I no longer need to tell them. My disappearance wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Not an escape, but an emergence. In losing everything I found, what couldn't be taken, my core self uncompromised, and finally completely free. The betrayal taught me that family isn't determined by blood, but by choice, daily, intentional choice. The people who truly love you see you clearly and stay anyway. They don't try to edit your story to fit their narrative. They don't vanish when you need them most. And sometimes, when the family you were born into fails you, the universe offers a second chance with the family you choose. Not as a replacement, but as a reminder that connection comes in many forms, and the most authentic ones are rarely the most convenient. I no longer fear being found. I've already found myself. And that, in the end, is the greatest vanishing act of all, disappearing who you were forced to be and emerging as who you truly are. Before this story ends, remember one thing: your life belongs to you. Not to those who claim to love you, not to those who share your blood, not even to those who raised you. The moment you realize this is the moment you become truly free. So, if you're watching this and feel trapped in a life others have designed for you, know that disappearance isn't your only option. Transformation is. Stand your ground. Reclaim your narrative. Rebuild on your terms. The greatest revenge against those who tried to erase you isn't to vanish. It's to become more vividly, authentically yourself than they ever allowed you to be. I should know. I died on an ICU table and was reborn in the aftermath. And the woman who emerged is finally completely awake.